One. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World, episode 80. Mayday, Mayday, Jerry, Mayday, because it is May 1st as we're recording this. And oh my God, America is in trouble. It's about to crash. I'm Andrew Langer.
I'm Jerry Rogers.
And you've been saying this for a while, but Mayday, I could have started this. I thought about starting this by playing the Soviet national anthem or the Chinese Communist Party national anthem, because of course May Day is the big holiday in Marxist Leninist Maoist circles. It's contrary to all of that, Ilya Soman's got a great piece up about how this should, this is the International Day of remembering the victims of communism. But May Day also is the shouting of emergency and distress. And Lord knows, I mean, I don't even know where to begin with this week. Maybe we should probably start with what's going on the college campuses, Jerry. I assume you want to start there as well.
Well, I'm almost, for the first time in my life, at a loss for words, because it is so obvious that these pro-terror mobs, these Jew-hating mobs, are being funded by the radical left, by George Soros type monies. It's obvious it's all coordinated. It's obvious that the administrations in these universities agree with the Jew hatred because they've been teaching it, right?
Right.
You can't hire professors in colonialism and oppression and anti-Zionism and then expect not to radicalize your students. And so what surprises me and why I'm concerned is there aren't enough good people, sane people on the left who are saying stop. Jonah Goldberg was on CNN 2 weeks ago, or around 2 weeks ago, when this was starting, and he was visibly struck.
Right.
And his point was that the right is critical of the right. The right has been critical of MAGA Donald Trump when appropriate and when inappropriate. And he was just yelling and screaming about where are the people on the left to call this out.
Right.
But here's the great irony that the Jonah Goldbergs don't understand. You created this. You helped create this circumstance where Jew haters and pro-terror mobs can take over our campuses.
Right.
They can take over our major cities, major thoroughfares, because you've decided that uncomfortable tweeting and bad hair trumps right and wrong and principle. So I blame part of this on the never Trump left or right. I'm sorry, the right. I mean, the never Trump right for not standing by principle, not standing by truth and good policy, not standing for Americanism, make America great over the last 7-8 years.
And let me add to that, Jerry, and I want to go on a tack here for a second, so just stay with me, because it's also about enabling, right? It is about coddling and there's been this narrative. There wasn't, at least a few months back, we don't hear much of it anymore, but there was this narrative that this rise in anti-Semitism in America is to be laid at Donald Trump's feet. That was something that the left was using as an excuse.
And unfortunately, so was the never Trump right.
Right. This is my point. What I'm getting to with what you're saying about Jonah. And there was never this culpability on their part about this issue, because the reality is, of course, the same people who are going crazy on these college campuses and yelling things like, go back to the gas chambers, go back to Poland, what have you. These are the same kids, maybe not the same kids, same professors, certainly, who were teaching other kids, these kids' predecessors on these same college campuses, to go crazy about Donald Trump, right? You are not going to find you listen, you may find anti-Semitism amongst the right. You may, but on the other hand, you don't have the level of it as you do on this, with the never Trump left that we have, and again, to differentiate between them and Jonah Goldberg. We're on a slightly different road here, because I want to string a couple of different stories together, and I want to talk about privilege at some point on this show, because there have been a couple of really interesting examples of that. But
let me add one thing to your
please.
list, and that is the uselessness of the libertarian.
Yes.
You have libertarians really mixing apples and oranges, forgive the cliche, saying that we can't attack free speech. We have to protect free speech. What's happening with the police on these campuses is a violation of free speech. We're not talking about free speech. If someone wants to yell and scream anti-Jew slogans, they can do that.
Right.
It's wrong, and I'll oppose it.
Right.
What we're talking about is the violence, the intimidation, is the trespass, is the burglary, is the mayhem, the chaos, and the mob.
And
that's what we're talking about.
And the violation of mutually accepted norms on these college campuses that has been completely violated, right? This is, Michael Greva said it best when he said, you want the most horrific people among us to shout their asinine ideals to the high heavens, big pink neon signs over their heads, demonstrating that they're a bunch of a-holes. We want that. Absolutely we do. But this goes a step further. And here's what gets me, Jerry. And again, we talk about responsible adults and the responsible things to do. And the White House finally sort of saying something half-assed. And I'm sorry, Geraldine, I may get a little salty with my remarks here. There was a story last week, I think I mentioned this to you on the phone, Jerry, about a woman who was pled guilty on Friday to $150 million in mail fraud. Chinese American, Chinese woman of Chinese origin living in the United States. I don't know if you saw the story. Did I mention this to you?
I don't think so.
The point is, the U.S. Postal Service let this go for many, many years. There's a point to this, why I'm raising this, Jerry. Let this go for many years. And I asked the question online, well, do you think maybe the U.S. Postal Service could have caught on to this when it was only 50 million or 25 million? And maybe, just maybe, if the U.S. Postal Service hadn't been spending money and resources spying on conservative social media, maybe they might have caught this woman and charged her earlier. Maybe if the Justice Department wasn't using SWAT teams to go after abortion protesters, pro-life protesters, maybe something could be done here. The issue is, right, there are things that are being done on and you got to the crux of it really early on, Jerry. I had a conversation yesterday with Zachary Marshall from Campus Reform. He's their editor-in-chief. And he also said and talked about the foreign funding, the Soros funding, and the coordination. Where is
my goodness, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's the same type of tent.
Right.
On the various campuses.
They didn't all go on Amazon and say, oh my God,
we're going to buy the green tents.
Buy the green tents. They're $3 for $1, whatever it is. The point, and this is exactly the thing that we talked about yesterday with Zach Marshall. By the way, that whole interview, about an hour's worth, going to be up on the lunch hour on Monday. I'm hoping I'm moving it up in the ranks. But the point is that clearly there is some kind of movement at work, and if it is being funded by foreign government and foreign sources, where the hell is our law enforcement capability? Right, there is free speech, obviously, but then there are foreign funded conspiracies to undermine our institutions of higher learning, and have been doing so, by the way, for decades. Right, decades. This is the end result, as we've talked about here on the show, of 60 years of academia becoming, and not so slowly, becoming a place of indoctrination as opposed to teaching, and teaching critical and skeptical thought. And this is the end result of that. But the idea, this shows you just how bass-ackwards this administration's priorities are, that they're going after folks who are peacefully standing in the way of a woman who wants to kill her baby. They're using the full brunt of law enforcement against those people, and nothing about what's going on these college campuses. Terror apologists among us.
Look, there are news reports such as they are, because, outside of the New York Post up in New York, what's happening at Columbia, at City College, at NYU, it's now broken out to dozens of campuses around the country, including now Johns Hopkins in Maryland. But you make a great point here where we're told by law enforcement, federal law enforcement, by the FBI, the Department of Justice, that the greatest threat to America is domestic terrorism from Orthodox Catholics and Christian nationalists.
Right.
Now, this is ridiculous on its face. It's ridiculous on its face, but regardless, this is the same FBI that we now know from a wonderful piece, very research-centered piece in the Wall Street Journal by by economist John Lott, where the FBI is not taking crime data from cities like Baltimore and Memphis, and that they're also manipulating crime data from the largest cities like New York and LA, and they're telling us that crime is down. In fact, it's not. It's spiked. There's a piece up from City Journal at the Real Clear Policy today talking about how, no, there's a serious, dangerous crime spike. My point is that federal law enforcement is gaslighting us on crime.
Right.
And they're also gaslighting us in terms of where the threats are coming from. They're telling us, again, that Orthodox Catholics are a bigger threat than the folks funding the campus mob, the anti-Jewish campus mob. And here's the thing: there was a news report. This is where I started, and I'll throw it back to you. There's a news report in the New York Post from yesterday or earlier this week that the wife of a known terrorist arrested in the U.S. Was convicted and imprisoned in the U.S., recently deported. Guess where this woman is? She's on the campus at Columbia.
Of course she is.
So there are known terrorists. Oh, by the way, another good report coming from the New York Post that many of the groups that we know who are funding and supporting the anti-Jewish mob on our college campuses are all front groups for Hamas.
Right. Right. And see, here's the thing it reminds me of. You're talking about this affirmative misidentification of the problem, where the threats come from. I'm reminded of a 1990s Saturday Night Live sketch. Kevin Nealon as the politically incorrect PI, right? And he's called in to investigate an attack at an abortion clinic. Now, you use the opposite to prove your point, but it was very clear that the story of the point that this sketch was making was that this abortion clinic had been attacked by pro-life protesters, but all Kevin Nealon wanted to do was blame it on young black men still angry about the Rodney King verdict, and it was this idea of ignoring the facts to fit your particular narrative.
Sure.
So you flip that on its head, right? And so for all through 2020, right? All through 2020, we had riot after riot. Beforehand, right? We had mobs going through various districts. I guess that was in 2020 as well, demanding that people mouth the magical words of what the mob wanted in order for the mob to go away.
And then responsible people who should know better. I keep on thinking about that Ronald Reagan clip when he's addressing university professors and university leaders when there was unrest on California.
Right.
When he was governor of California. And he says, you should know better.
Right.
The people who should have known better in 2020 literally got on their knees and pledged fealty and asked for forgiveness from the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right.
This was Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden. This is the state, by the way, and I'm going to be partisan. The state of the Democratic Party, it has been captured. It's ideological capture. It is now progressive. It is socialist. It is communist. It is violent. It is anti-American. It is dangerous. And again, this is why the Jonah Goldbergs, I have no more patience for them. Right. You, in your pride, your hubris, your dislike for the orange man has allowed for the capture of the Democrats by ideological extremism. We've lost the Democratic Party, and the administrative state is becoming overrun with with radical regulations and rules.
Listen.
And our government, we're getting to a point where our government is going to be too far gone. And again, who do I blame for this? Yes, I blame the progressives. Yes, I blame the Joe Bidens and the radical groups. But you know, the Bill Kristols and the Jonah Goldbergs and the your friend, the former RNC chairman,
Michael Steele,
whose name I can't recall because that's what I think of him. It's their fault too.
You know, it's by the way, just as an aside, you have you linked, I don't know who wrote it, great piece you linked to this morning at Town Hall about the rise in bureaucrats under Joe Biden. Thank you for doing that, by the way. But this is just it. I was going to offer up, I'm going to offer up this non sequitur because I think this is going to be the focus of the show today. I don't know if we're going to talk about much else. Because I got asked this question yesterday in a radio interview about what's going to happen in November, really September, starting with the debates and whether or not Biden and Trump are going to debate one another, and talking about a little bit about this Monmouth poll. Have you seen this Monmouth poll? Basically, 50% of Americans want a different candidate than either of the two major parties. This is why I'm bringing it up, Jerry, is because we're talking about the conventions and the timeline, and the Republican convention happening in July and the Democratic convention happening in August. And I hedged my bets yesterday because, as I recall, you may correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the Democratic convention is going to be held in Chicago this summer.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're going back to Chicago at a period of great student unrest, with a bunch of folks who are live action role playing the 60s. Right. And here's something I want to dispel, by the way. Most of the professors who are behind this, because I want to go to something else with the professors, were not around in the 60s. They were not teaching in the 60s, but they yearn because their professors, their mentors were all in the 60s. They yearn to have that moment themselves.
Let me just comment real quick on
here's
this.
My point, though. My point is, I am dreading what's going to happen in Chicago in August at the Democratic National Convention. And I dare say that's one of the wild cards here that is going to create the real contrast between the Donald Trumps of the world and the Joe Bidens of the world, and who supports what. And let me leave you with this, because who's the mayor's no longer Lori Lightfoot. It is not. Mayor Daley.
It's Brandon Johnson.
It is not Mayor Daley anymore, who can go in there and sort of move in and violently calm the crowd. It is yet another one of these ineffectual Democrats governing the city. I'm sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Well, a couple things. Just to comment on some of the things you mentioned. Number one, on debates, there will not be debates. It'll be a shame, and it's Donald Trump's fault, because the Joe Biden camp can simply say, well, we want this structure, we want this media personality to host, and make these demands that the Trump camp just can't abide. But they have no moral authority, because Donald Trump should have debated in the primary, in the GOP primary, and he refused. And so now, unfortunately, if there were one or two debates, I think that would show to folks who don't pay attention to politics, and there are many, that Joe Biden is not equipped to be president. And he shot himself in the foot. That's Donald Trump being Donald Trump and being stupid. But let me just go further here. You're absolutely right about the 60s protests and today's kind of Gen X professors wanting that kind of, hey, I was at Woodstock, or hey, this is my Woodstock, that sort of thing. But here's what they don't realize. And I was struck by this week. My wife went to a prayer meeting. My wife goes to community Bible study, and she's involved there in leadership. And she was praying about the campus unrest, asking for God's grace and peace, and asking for free speech to be made clear, but for violence in the mob, to be a check on that we're a nation of laws. And she prayed this. Anyway, one of the other ladies in this group came to her and said, I'm a product of the 60s. I was at the universities in the 60s when we protested, and this is just like that. This will blow over. This is actually good for America. And God bless her. She's entitled to her opinion, as wrong-headed as it is. But this is what I told my wife, and I want to tell our listeners and viewers, and that is the protests, the anti-Vietnam War protests in the 60s,
I'm nodding.
all they did was prolong the war. What they did was essentially the Viet Cong in the South, the Vietnamese communists in the North were defeated wholly by 1967-68.
Right.
They were manifestly, unequivocally defeated, and they held on because there were protests on college campuses, and they knew it didn't make a difference what they did on the battlefield. It didn't make a difference how many people died. What made a difference was they had to hold out long enough for the protests to convince the government it wasn't worth it. And let me tell you something. How many American boys, the average age of a death in Vietnam was 19. How many American boys died from 1960?
In World War II, the average age of the combat soldier was 26. In Vietnam, he was 19.
Yeah. So anyway, 19.
Sorry.
So how many 19-year-old boys died in Vietnam? How many working class Irish from the Bronx? How many black working class from Chicago? How many farm boys in rural America? How many of America's poor and working class families sacrificed in Vietnam? So the elite, privileged, ignorant protesters could protest in college campuses. It prolonged the war and gave us death. That's exactly what's happening today. These dumbass, ignorant, privileged, elite, wealthy college students are now prolonging the war in Gaza. And who's dying? Mostly Gazans, mostly Palestinians. And this is what Hamas wants. They want to hold out. They don't care how many Palestinians die. They want to hold out long enough for the world to turn on Israel.
And in the same way that if you look back and you see what was behind a lot of these anti-war movements in the 1960s in America and who was funding it, guess what? A lot of that money was coming from the Soviet Union.
No kidding. Let me tell you, I want to be clear about this.
Yeah.
There is nothing positive that came out of the protest movement of the 60s. It divided America.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit there, only because you're right about it prolonging the war, and we should have learned our lesson there. And you're right in the fact that we didn't learn our lesson from, the abuses of power of the government, et cetera, and what we could have done then. At least there was somewhat of a moral high ground insofar as you had students, privileged students for the most part, who didn't want to go and fight, protesting being sent to fight against their will. There's a little bit of a moral high ground there that
I don't know. I seem to remember that if you were wealthy, you got a high draft number. If you were wealthy, you can call your senator. Your daddy got you. What's the CCR song? I'm not a senator's son.
I'm no senator's son. Yes, of course.
Right. And also remember this: you can get college deferment after deferment after deferment. The people who went to Vietnam were people like my dad, who were young and poor and ethnic and loved their country. And while men like my father were fighting in jungles, there were others on the campuses of Columbia and Harvard and Yale protesting, yet they didn't even have to go
back to school. When I was up to my knees in rice paddies, you guys were here at home smoking grass, listening to your damn Beatle records. Yes. But my point, let me just offer one example of this issue of privilege that bugged the crap out of me. There was a lot there, Jerry, and I gotta come back to some of it as well. But the galling moment to me, there are many galling moments, some of which I also still want to get to, was this piece that's come out today, the interview with one of the student leaders up at Columbia before the cops raided it, who essentially was demanding that Columbia provide them with food because we're paying for our meal plans. Therefore, we should get Columbia to provide us with food and water. All we're asking for is a glass of water. And the reporter says, well, wait a minute. You chose to do this. Didn't you think ahead? And the answer clearly was no. They hadn't thought ahead.
But think about
this.
the hubris there,
Yes. Right.
where they don't want to be held accountable or responsible for anything. And you know what? Shame on their parents.
Right.
You know, we're talking about the professors and the university administrations, but where are the parents?
Right.
You know, here's the thing,
Well,
Andrew.
no, this is the problem, Jerry. The parents, because they are Gen Xers, if they're sending their kids to Columbia, I would say 95% of those parents are going to be incredibly proud of what their kids are doing. Let me get into something real quick on this. Sorry, go ahead. And then I got to get, because I've seen some bizarro, again, asinine statements from people our age who should know better. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's my point, that
Yeah.
these parents should know better. But here's the thing. I have talked about on my radio show at WBAL that these juvenile criminals, the 16, 17-year-old who goes out in the streets of Baltimore and does murder, mayhem, and worse, their parents should be held accountable. You know, if you let your child out at 11 o'clock at night, if you allow your child to have illegal guns in the home, if you allow your child or know about your child engaged in criminal activity and you do nothing, I think parents should be held
Snitches get stitches, Jerry.
in some ways should be held accountable.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think these parents who whose children are violent and trespassing and engaged in mob activity, I think that they also should be punished. Maybe they could be punished by the university saying, you know what, your child who's about to graduate in a week, who might have a 4.0 GPA,
Right.
because they caused mob and chaos and violence, guess what? They're expelled,
Right.
and you get no refund.
Right. Right. And and it's interesting because turning it to the issue of the professors and folks saying dumb things online. Because I've seen folks talk admiringly about what the students are doing on the Columbia campus. Someone I went to college with, who is no stranger to, again, taking anti-Trump positions in her professional career, Jewish extraction. In fact, somebody that a roommate of mine wanted me to date because we were both Jewish and both sophomores at William and Mary, was out there on Facebook applauding the professors standing in a ring around the George Washington University protesters to protect them from the police force. Like, I mean, like, this is, again, something that needs to be applauded, right? If you're a professor and all of a sudden the end of your academic year has been completely hijacked, everybody who's not finishing up gets, maybe they have to give them an incomplete, I don't know, maybe I think you try to fail them. And that's right. If they're due to graduate, maybe you belay that. And you make it, you send that really strong signal. Listen, at least thankfully now, major corporations and others are starting to recognize that recruiting from these campuses is not the smart thing to do, because you're going to, all of a sudden you're going to wind up like Google, with a bunch of your workers protesting in your offices.
Victor Davis Hanson, again, a political prophet, a year or 2 years ago, talked about this in the context of Stanford and how Stanford had gone full DEI.
Yes.
And how there were now more DEI administrators than in some instances, and than professors or educational experts, and that the standard for admission had been dumbed down. Essentially said too, if you were a white working class male, you'll never get into a Stanford or a Harvard, because it's minority first, and then it's privilege second, and then the working class folks, you're just out. It's funny how even when these universities go full on DEI, the privileged still get in.
Well, sure.
The people who are hurt are usually working class, the sons and daughters of working class Americans.
This gets into the double standards, privilege for me, but not for thee, right? And again, the other great example of this is what happened at USC over the weekend. So late last week, USC cancels their graduation ceremony. And a young woman takes to TikTok and says, you know something? This sucks, because I'm class of 2024, and you all may not remember, but our class was the class of 2020 4 years ago, and we all had our graduations canceled. And she's absolutely right, right? I mean, and so then rather than sort of recognize the idiocy of this, USC doubles down. And this is no joke. I'm not exaggerating this at all. USC turns around and sends out an email to students saying, hey, listen, we know many of you have never experienced a graduation before. They don't get into why. They said, but here, we're going to send you some pictures. But literally, they said, we're send you some pictures of prior USC graduations so you can see how joyful these events can be. And that, Jerry, sums up everything that is wrong with leftist privilege and authoritarian privilege out there. It's something you have said time and again. They make these rules because they know they're going to never have to live by them. They know that, you know, they can push everybody into mass transit because they'll always find a way to have their own car. Or they're gonna push everybody into electric vehicles because they'll always be able to afford a gas-powered car and find gas for that car. They're going to push people out of gas-powered stoves because they're going to be all of these things, right?
But their fancy restaurants will be grandfathered in, will be allowed to keep it's ridiculous.
And just
like during COVID, right? During COVID,
100%.
You stay home, you can't go out, you can't go to church, you can't go to work. Your business is going to go bankrupt.
But if you're Gavin Newsom, you can go to the French Laundry, one of the most exclusive restaurants.
Right.
Right. If you're Giuseppe's Pizzeria on the corner of Arthur Avenue and 186th Street, no, you're shut down. But I don't know, whatever the per se down at Columbus Circle, they can remain open.
But here's a question for you, Andrew. You know, I mean, the two-tiered culture that the left has created is real.
Yeah.
Yet there are myriad Americans, millions of Americans, who still vote for the Progressive Party.
Right.
How is this? And again, it's not just elites who are doing this. I mean, working class people. I could think of many people anecdotally in my own life personally who will vote for Joe Biden.
But wasn't that the seismic shift in 2020, Jerry, was amongst those working class people, the folks who've sort of risen up and say, hey, I mean, that's the thing that, you know, that's fascinating about this interplay and the lack of a reaction on the part. If Donald Trump and Donald Trump's campaign were smart, they would be tying together Joe Biden trying to pay off the student loans for these little a-holes with what's happening on these campuses and the enabling of this behavior. And
but here's the thing too, is how brilliant is
Americans saying, you know, this is what Joe Biden is doing. He's taking your money to fund these little jerks on campuses.
But this is the brilliance of the left, right? This is Operation Lawfare. This is why there are 4 cases, 2 criminal cases, 2 civil cases, 91 counts, indictments. They are keeping Donald Trump and his advisors and his lawyers and his money tied up in bogus legal action. And so he's not on the campaign trail making these connections. He'll do it in a lobby of a courthouse, or he'll go to a bodega and he'll talk about it, and he has. But it's not enough. It has to be daily. It has to be daily.
I don't even know who's a Trump surrogate anymore, right? Do we have any idea who to try?
No.
This is a legitimate question, Jerry.
No.
Who are the Trump surrogates in 2024?
I have no idea.
I don't know who they are. I don't know who's out there speaking on behalf of the president.
The joke was in 2016 that Joe Biden ran for office from the basement. You know, in 2024, it's not a joke, but Trump is going to be running from a courtroom, and this is their strategy.
Can I just say, this is the galling thing about this.
The left strategy.
This is, you know, I'm going to say this about the Trump trials, especially this trial in New York, the hush money trial that's going on there. I don't understand. Not that I don't know. I do understand why. Because this is exactly what the judge wants. Ultimately, someone realized we don't have to get Trump convicted, and we don't have to keep the trial. I mean, we have to keep the trials going. But if we gag Donald Trump in a bizarrely subjective gag order that we can find him willy-nilly, but more to the point, if we keep him handcuffed to that seat in that courtroom, we've won.
Yeah.
And this idea, right, the whole concept of having a lawyer represent you is that you don't necessarily have to be in court all the time, right? And the idea that this judge can order Donald Trump to remain there, you know, something, just show the cojones, show the testicular fortitude, judge, and put Trump in jail, right? You take the, because you know what would happen. You don't want to take the next step of actually imprisoning Donald Trump, because you know what that'll do in terms of Donald Trump's numbers. So you're going to do frankly the wimpy thing. I was going to use another word, I won't use it. The wimpy thing, and you're I'm just gonna make you stay here, because that's the kind of a-hole that I am. You can't go to your son's graduation. You can't go out and campaign.
He couldn't go to the Supreme Court that was hearing his case
hearing. That's exactly
on immunity.
That's exactly
and by
right.
the way, I listened to some of the questioning from the left of center judges, and these were good questions. Like, for instance, it might have been Sotomayor, I forget, but I'm pretty sure it was Sotomayor. She asked a question to the Trump attorney, or not asked the question, well, if a president sells nuclear secrets to a foreign enemy, would he be immune from that? And I understand the question,
right?
But what? And again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but two things popped into my head immediately. First was, okay, but if he had to do this as part of his duty as president, i.e., did it as a way to scam this foreign entity or a way to save other secrets. My point is that what Nixon said, I think, is true. If the president does it, it's not illegal. It's not against the law. But here's the second thing that popped in my head. The second thing that popped in my head was, by that standard, I am looking forward to see Donald Trump should win the immunity case, period. I think a president, when engaged in his office, his duty as president, I think he's immune from criminal
official acts. Yes.
Yeah. Now, yes, official acts, though, can be
official capacity. If he goes,
all right, fine,
and he decides to go and if the court assassinate a terrorist,
right?
That yes,
because according to
I'll give you a prime example of another question that came up. Should FDR have been prosecuted criminally, or could FDR have been prosecuted criminally for interning the Japanese Americans at Manzanar? The answer is no. He was acting in his official capacity.
Okay.
And he had the case can be made. Now there can be hearings about this. I'm sorry, Jerry. Go ahead.
Now, I would have used a closer to present day example of Barack Obama ordering the assassination of American citizens on foreign soil.
Right. Yes. Okay. I'll go with that too. But my point is that the founding fathers created a mechanism. It was called the impeachment process.
Yes.
Because they felt that in the end, at the end of the day, the worst punishment you could give a sitting president for some malfeasance that they had done in office was to remove them from office. Now, whether or not you want to prosecute them down the road, sure. But again, you have to get into this issue of what's an official act and what's done in the personal capacity, right? I would suggest that a president being removed from office because of bribery, well, removing him from office is the punishment. And I think it's just, it sort of goes,
I also have great, and again, I wish people on the left would speak the truth here. With the Smith prosecution, the special prosecutor, everything Donald Trump said on January 6th, everything he said is protected by the First Amendment.
Right.
Even if Trump did say, go and storm the
you were talking about the Willis prosecution, because the Smith prosecution is about the documents.
No, isn't the Smith case also about insurrection? There are two federal cases. One is the documents, the other is insurrection.
Okay.
Right?
Is there? I got to go back. I'm sorry, Derry. Let's just keep going. Let's assume for a moment that you're correct.
But again, the bottom line is that Donald Trump could have, from the dais, he could have said, go burn the shit down.
Right. Well, I don't know if he could have said go burn the shit down, but again, he could have been. That would have necessitated.
Well, you get my point. You understand my point.
We would have been impeached for that. Again, it's a situation, and I'm rereading a book called The Guns of the South, Jerry, which
I like
is
this
about
book.
the Civil
I know
War.
this
I love
book.
the book.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's taken on a whole new meaning now that I'm reading it, and I have, you know, Wikipedia on my phone, and I can look at maps and things like that to sort of see where
But you know,
things are.
Andrew, I might have taken it a step too far. But my point is,
But no, but Jerry,
the
you're right.
president is being prosecuted for exercising his right to free speech on January 6th.
But also, I mean, but Jerry,
it's
bringing it back to the hush money trial, right? I mean, again, the president, or I'm sorry, any citizen has a right to pay someone money for not printing a story. They have the
yeah,
right to do that.
I know.
And it's not a.
And the funny thing is, again,
and,
just
hold on. Oh, and by the way, if you are running for president, you have the right to spend your own money on that campaign. Right, there are no campaign,
I know.
there is no
But the
violation
greatest
of campaign finance laws.
the greatest evidence, again, they're saying that, well, there was a well, first of all, they're saying that he violated federal law. He didn't.
No, but also he violated federal law, not state law. You know,
exactly right.
you know,
Right.
so-
I mean, this again, the whole thing is ridiculous. The judge should have thrown it out. It's but the one thing that proves the whole case ridiculous is when he did pay Cohen back.
Say Pecker, Jerry. I want to hear you say
When
Pecker.
he paid his attorney back the money that was given to Stormy Daniels, he paid him enough for the taxes to be paid.
Right.
If he was trying to hide it,
right,
he wouldn't have done that.
That's which gets back into the.
I want to hide this from the government. So, but I'm going to make sure the taxes are paid on it.
That's exactly it. But it's, you know, again, this comes back down to hamstringing this guy.
Yes,
we've gotten much further afield from this, but it's important that we talk about these things, because at the same time this is going on, we've got.
But because it's all connected, right? I mean, look,
of course it is.
Look, I just again just how these things are connected. We're told by the left is pushing diversity, equity, inclusion, and this has resulted directly to the Jew hatred we're seeing in our country today. We're seeing a redefinition by regulatory fiat, redefining what a woman is, what gender is in Title IX. And we're also seeing the government being used to favor one race over another. Again, close to home, the mayor of Baltimore City has decided that he's going to use the COVID relief funds, part of those funds, to give to African-American artists, and specifically not to white artists.
Yeah.
And again, that's the very definition of institutional racism, when the government decides.
That's the thing that gets back to me, was this other story that popped up yesterday. I think it was, maybe it was Monday, in which the Biden administration admits that they're going after the capital gains tax, but I also think it's the inheritance tax as well. Will be able to solve, you know, racial inequities, past racial inequities. And again, saying that, okay, essentially we are enacting a tax against you if you're white. And
again, this is the very definition of institutional racism. And the reason why I bring it up is because this is the progressive vision. This is the fundamental transformation of American culture and society and law, which is what the left has wanted to do. And Barack Obama was able to push a lot of this forward, and now the Bidens are finishing the job
and hitting the gas pedal in ways. I used to make the joke about the Obama administration regulation, and when Jerry's talking about the expansion of the administrative state and doing things by fiat.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, just for clarity, I just looked up the four cases. Yeah. You know, Smith. There's two cases by Smith.
Okay.
One is the documents case. The other is the insurrection. He's being charged with trying to overthrow the election. Again, mind you,
right?
The federal the current Department of Justice is prosecuting the former president essentially because of January 6th,
right?
Trying to overthrow the government, even though that president peacefully relinquished power and left Washington, D.C.
Let's remember that
it's insane. It's insanity.
Remember, and we've talked about this before, and I know this because I was contacted about it.
Oh,
Because
yes.
right, because one of the things they're talking about are the another. So it's just been announced that there's a case against a group of Arizonans for trying to create a false slate. I'm using air quotes for
This
the
is
false slate
lawfare.
of electors, and yet there were no prosecutions. Right? Imagine, Jerry. I mean, again, we have to put the shoe on the other foot. Imagine if in 2017, 2018, 2019, Donald Trump had his Justice Department go after the folks who had tried to put together alternative slates of electors from the 2016 election. Imagine that.
And they
the
did.
hue and
Just
cry,
for the record,
yeah,
this is not an academic conversation we're having here.
right.
The Hillary campaign hired attorneys and election experts to create alternative electors for the 2016
Right.
election.
And I was contacted. I was contacted because I'd been a possible elector in 2008, and apparently
that was legal in 2016, but magically became illegal in 2020.
Right. And again, that would be something that somebody ought to be talking about, in terms of these prosecutions, these other.
Well, this has always been Donald Trump's problem, right? Look, you and I have done a good job talking about how the 2020 election was rigged. I mean, there were state laws that were changed in an unconstitutional manner. The rules for accepting ballots, these rules were broken. We know. I don't understand again why our side doesn't talk more about this, but I'm hearing more and more about states that were close where Biden won. We're finding out that thousands of dead people voted.
Listen, I just heard a story
right?
about a school board election in Virginia, in which it became a hotly contested, one of the most expensive school board races in a rural county in Virginia, where they peeled back the vote and they found out people in severe dementia wards in old age assisted living facilities were getting absentee ballots, and those absentee ballots were being sent in by people who can't even recognize their children. Were apparently voting in a school board
2020, there was all kinds of foul play by the Democrats. This is just the truth.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has not been able to make this case, and it's because every time he opens his mouth,
and that's the problem, is that some of it is his own team's fault, and bringing on idiots to work with him on these.
I don't even know who the hell's his team.
Well, his team now, I don't know. I mean, I've been talking about his team then, right? You and I know there's one particular person who was a senior legal advisor, who just was completely out of her depth in all of this.
Well, look, this is what they're going to do again. They're going to steal. Look, we see the numbers.
Well, I know you think Joe Biden's going to win outright.
I think he's going to win. I think he's going to win outright because I think they're going to play games in Wisconsin and Michigan, in Virginia. I think they're going to play games.
Well, I think they're
going to run up the vote.
I think. Listen, what I think is, and I know I said this before, but I think it's going to take us a very long time to know who's president of the United States. I think.
Look, if we don't know election night, then it's going to be Joe Biden. Well, there's my prediction.
I think
if there isn't a declared winner at 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. or thereabouts,
let's say 2 a.m.
2 a.m. Then Joe Biden will have stole his second election. And again, I say that I know that there are a lot of kooks who talk about conspiracies and stolen elections.
We're not talking about Kraken and voting machines and
we're talking about the state of Pennsylvania unconstitutionally changing the mechanism by which they collect votes.
Right. That never being challenged by
Trump. And that is a fact. Well, actually, when the Trump administration or when the Trump campaign challenged it, it was too late.
Right.
And so they lost in court, but they lost in court not on the merit, but on the timeliness.
Yes.
It was too late. What are we going to do? I said this then. The Trump campaign decided to challenge these things after certification.
Right.
Once a state certifies,
Oh, no, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You're too late. But they should have been challenged when the law was passed, and you should have had folks who were
which
with
was
the
a year
wherewithal,
before the
the
election.
Pennsylvania Republican Party, or not even, no, it wasn't even a year before the election, right? Because they changed it in the midst of COVID, but you challenge it then. And you make it, you make it really clear that even with these extraordinary circumstances, we can't have this going. Here's the thing. Here's the reason why I am a little bit less certain about what's going to happen, because there's so much craziness that can ensue between now and then, whether it's bird flu, whether it's unrest during the various political conventions, whether it's something going on with the various trials. What happens
or the Democrats pull a bait and switch.
See, I think it's too late for that.
No, it's not.
I don't.
It's not. Why?
I can't see it happening. I think if I listen again, it is May 1st as we're recording this.
No, but the scenario, if it happens, it'll happen this way. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will receive the nomination.
Yes.
In late August. And they might campaign and everything will seem normal, even if there's a rough and tumble Chicago protest and everything else. Again, a rough and tumble Chicago might help Trump.
It's all about the numbers.
Right. Show, the chaos. I think what's going to happen, it has to if it doesn't happen by the second week of September, it's not going to happen.
Right.
But what I think is going to happen is sometime in the first 2 weeks of September, Joe Biden is going to say, I'm ill.
Well, it has to be, it has to be before September 15, right? In fact, that's why Jerry lays out a really interesting scenario, and I'm willing to go along with him on this. September 15th is supposed to be the date of the first and right now the only debate. And Donald Trump is going to continue to press Joe Biden on this. And if they don't get any bounce out of the convention, the Democrats don't get any bounce out of the convention in August, and these mammoth poll numbers continue, or the others poll numbers continue to look like it's huge numbers of Americans don't want to vote for Donald Trump, right? What is it now, Jerry? 52% of the nation, or 52%?
I know, but if you look at the real clear average, if you look at all the polling, Trump has led in all swing states. The only swing state he's losing now, he's losing by 0.2%.
Right, Jerry. No. I'm not saying, listen, the Monmouth poll says that Biden and Trump are neck and neck with one another in terms of if you had to vote today. But the electorate is asked, if it literally is, it's literally.
I know, but do you trust that question? There's so many people still, and I talk to them in DC, and you talk to them too. I was at a breakfast meeting, and a pharmaceutical executive came over to me and pulled me aside and whispered to me that he was going to support Donald Trump. And I thought to myself, why is he whispering this to me?
I get it.
So I think people are just conditioned to say both these guys stink.
Okay. Well, yeah, but but here's the question. Do I trust the question? I ask you the question, would you rather have two different candidates?
Well, let me ask you a question. I'll ask you this question.
Yeah.
Would you rather have two different candidates?
Yes, I would.
And so would I.
There you go.
But that's why the question doesn't matter.
But except that
everyone would.
Well, that's just it. But if Joe Biden can't get over that 44% threshold,
yeah,
right. If the numbers or if he goes down in point of fact, then Donald Trump rises a little bit. And I agree with you that there's a certain amount of the Bradley effect at work here that people don't want to admit that they are going to support Donald Trump. But they can get through that with the internal numbers. They'll have a much better idea of what's going on here. If those numbers look bad, then yeah. But what they'll say is, in advance of that first debate, they'll pull it then and they'll say, the president has fallen ill.
Yeah,
something's going on. And
again, to add to this,
and then it'll be Westmore.
And the reason why I say first 2 weeks, you lay out a good reason. It's the alleged, we'll see, might happen, first debate, but it's also the deadlines to get on the ballots begin to solidify in late September.
Well, early voting starts in some places in September.
Yeah, but I know, but there is a drop dead date in September, and so they have to pull out ahead of that. And you're right. I have said before, I think it might be Westmore. If it's going to be anybody, the only person it can't be Wes Moore. Wes Moore, I think, has been shown to be an empty suit. This guy with the Key Bridge collapse, you think he was the head cheerleader at a major university and not the governor of a state. I mean, he really is just, he's Captain Cliche. He has not shown any substance, and he'd be destroyed on the national stage. Now, that could change later. I think the only person who could take the position from Biden is Mrs. Obama.
Well, I would be
the only person. Also, because how else do you tell African Americans your base? Well, we're going to pass over Kamala Harris. Well, because we're going to have another Obama.
Right.
On. That's why.
Right. Yeah, I know. I think that's.
But we'll see.
So let me ask you this, because I've been wrapping my head around this. Obviously, I believe and still believe, and I think the narrative shows that, No Labels was going to pull more from.
What a joke.
Hold on, but No Labels was going to pull more from Biden than they were from Trump, which is why the Democrat power structure went after No Labels with such vehemence,
and No Labels caved.
Right. And
what a joke of an organization.
Well, I mean, they were left with no choice. I mean, in the end, right? In the end, it's if you can't find the candidate who will run because the Democratic power structure threatens every candidate who's going to run, then that's just it. If you're Larry Hogan,
I guess
you can run for Senate. But anyway, set all of that aside.
I get it.
The point is, I think, and I could be wrong about this, I think RFK Jr. pulls equally from both.
Well, look, I said this early on when Democrats were apoplectic about RFK Jr. I said on our program, on my other programs, I said, I don't get the joke. I think this guy's going to pull from Trump. Right. This guy is a progressive nationalist. He says the right things that working people care about. The problem with RFK is that in his heart of hearts, he is as progressive, as liberal as any of the rest of them. But he has enough of the anti-establishment rhetoric, and also, there's a reality to him in terms of his pitch for the underdog. I believe him when he talks about the elites. Ironically, a Kennedy talking about this, but I believe he believes it. I think I've been consistent. I don't think he pulls even. I think potentially RFK pulls from Trump. Everyone said that his choice of running mate, whose name I can't remember.
Yeah. Rich lady.
And that was
rich ex-wife.
But that was the problem when he chose her.
Yeah.
I said this was the dumbest pick. And no, Jerry, this will really get into the Biden voter. I said, no, it won't, because no one will remember her name.
Yeah.
I don't remember her name. And I work in politics every single day. I don't know her name. So I think the vice president selection was a bomb on his part. And I think that maybe you're right. Maybe he pulls evenly.
Speaking of which, because I don't think you and I have talked about this real quick before we go, because you and I both have things to do. The Kristi Noem story. Kristi
Noem should get off the stage.
I mean,
she's become a joke. She has Palinized herself.
Well, I mean, and thankfully did it before she was put on the ticket. I mean, at least there.
Oh, he might still choose her, but look, she lost.
No possible way.
Well,
she is
good.
Done. There's no possible way he's going to choose.
Well,
her.
Again, but she lost it when there was a series of credible stories that she's having a extramarital affair with Lewandowski, whatever his name is.
Right. Yeah, but I think you and I have different perspectives on why that ruled her out. I thought it ruled her out because it means she has really poor taste in men.
Also the fact that she's a married mother and he's a married father.
Yes.
Good governor. I mean, she's governed. She's governed well.
Jerry, doesn't that give us all hope that you can be anyway? Sorry. But yeah, but in the end, this is just such a bizarre.
You know what I would do is have Trump. Know what I would do?
No. You tired of the roof of your car? Put her in a cage, put her on the roof of your car?
Oh my goodness, no. I would have a meeting with I'd meet with RFK Jr. and say, come on, be my running mate, and you'll be the heir apparent.
That would, yes, and I could see him doing that, but there's apparently some kind of rift between the two of them now.
But I would do
Over
that
this whole
though.
thing.
I wouldn't care.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think Tim Scott has now moved up in the ranks appreciably. But you know, who knows at this point in time? And maybe it's just going to
But
be
again,
Trump.
I know we have to go, but how bizarre that this president, this former president, can't even call on his former vice president for support because he more or less told the guys with pitchforks to go get him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, this is
like, folks, don't get us wrong. Andrew and I firmly believe that Donald Trump is a cartoon character, and that all things being equal, we wouldn't want him. But the nation's at risk with the current regime.
Let me real quick before we go, because it all gets summed up for what's important for me. You all know the regulatory work that I do. The American Action Forum has a report that was out last week about regulatory costs.
And by the way, I can't find it.
Oh,
are you talking about their $1 trillion year? Is that what you're talking about?
It's not true. Yeah, the report on.
All right, but that's not a report. That's they do that daily. I mean, weekly.
No. This is a much more lengthy report that they put out.
Okay, I'm sorry. And I do want it then. Send it to me, please.
Yeah, I will. So the point is that the regulatory costs have shot up. Now, I'd been estimating that it was about $750 billion for the first 3 years of the Biden administration. They're estimating it at about $1.35 trillion.
Yeah.
Which is essentially the entirety of the 8 years of the Obama administration in just the first 3 years of the Biden administration. But what's striking about it is, and I spent a lot of time talking about the regulatory glide path, the increase in regulatory costs under Trump, Jerry, $30 billion. $30 billion versus 1.3 trillion. Oh, by the way, that's 4 years. 4 years of the Donald Trump presidency. That tells you, what's important to me is keeping it on that glide path. You know, that is astounding news. I mean, even under George W. Bush, it was about yeah, I mean, it was in the hundreds of well, I got to go back and look again. You never do math on the air. I was trying to do math.
Well, look, in I think in the last week, here are some examples of the regulatory cost, right? So the Department of Interior rule on the outer continental shelf, $5.9 billion.
Yep.
The Department of Labor's overtime rule, which is actually the overtime rule is a big deal.
Huge.
5.6 billion. The Department of Labor's fiduciary rule, 2.5 billion.
Yeah.
Department of Health and Human Services rule on various aspects of Medicare, 2.2 billion. Department of Energy's efficiency standards ruling, 1.4 billion. I mean, add that up. And last week was more than the entire Trump administration combined.
100%. And let me just add two little contextual points to all of this. The definition of what's considered a major rule is Congress defines it as $100 million a year or more. The Biden administration redefined it as $200 million a year or more. But the point is, those are direct regulatory costs. What we're talking about is lost opportunity cost. There's a $19 multiplier for every dollar in direct regulatory costs. So if it's $1 billion in direct regulatory costs, that's $19 billion in lost opportunity cost. And what that means is you buy, you're forced to buy a new water heater. That's money you can't use to hire somebody to do work.
And so let's make the complex conversational.
Yes.
There's a reason why inflation is out of control and has remained out of control. Yes, it's government spending, but it's also the massive regulatory costs. It's also now, again, we're moving this year or next year where the payment on the national debt will be more than we're paying for national defense.
Right.
This is insanity.
Hold on. And Jerry, to also particularize the point, I'm sure you saw this story as the editor of Real Clear Health. Walmart announced yesterday that they are going to be closing all of the Walmart clinics in Walmart stores. Yeah. And they cite rising costs, inflation, and lower reimbursement rates from the federal government as
and again, they might not have cited this, but it's true. But retailers are shutting mini clinics, but retail outlets are shutting down because it costs too much to do business because of theft.
Yes. Hey, Jerry, unfortunately, we gotta
Yep.
close it here. You're on Sunday?
I am on Sunday. Hey, listen, I also have a new Business of America
Oh, good.
podcast out.
Please.
Family Matters. I talked to Tim Carney about his
Yay.
awesome new book called Family Unfriendly. One of the best half-hour podcasts you'll listen to. It's over at the Federal Newswire, the Business of America. And also, yeah, I'll be on Sunday. If it's Sunday, it's Jerry at WBAL. Listen, find the truth, plant your feet, stand firm. God bless you all.
Yeah, God bless you all. I've got a new lunch hour podcast up. I interview Stacey Washington, talk show host. She does a lot of policy work as well. Go and check that out at the Federal Newswire. Have a great week, everybody. Have fun, and please stay safe.